not just coal receiving lots of cash. Europe's biggest banks are pumping money into new oil and gas production, despite those pledges to reduce emissions. Analysis by the campaign group Share Action show that 25 banks have provided more than $33 billion in loans and other financing to at least 50 companies. HSBC put almost $9 billion into new oil and gas in 2021, while Barclays put in at least $4.5 billion. Deutsche Bank loaned almost $6 billion. The fossil fuel giants receiving the funding included ExxonMobil, Shell, BP, and Saudi Aramco. Well, the banks have insisted they are committed to working with their customers to achieve a transition towards low-carbon economy. While oil giant ExxonMobil has said that the International Energy Agency and the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change agree that significant investments in oil and gas is still needed through to 2050, even in a net zero scenario. Net zero, of course, refers to a state in which the greenhouse gases going into the atmosphere are balanced by the removal out of the atmosphere. Let's discuss this further with the market strategist and former economist at Citigroup, Mark Fulton, who's also the chair of the Research Council, the Carbon Tracker and founding partner of Energy Transition Advisors. He joins us from New South Wales in Australia. Thank you for your time, sir. Who are the biggest financiers when it comes to investment in coal and other carbon-intensive fossil fuels?
Well, essentially, I think if we take coal, I think it's important to step up a level and look at the countries involved. And there's a very good piece of work by the Global Energy Monitor, GEM, that points out that really it's the Chinese lead the financing world, followed by the US, in fact, is an important source of financing, followed by Japan, South Korea, India, and indeed Russia is on the list. I'm not sure how long they'll stay on the list. But essentially, those countries are the source countries, China being very critical to that. And I think, again, if you look even higher up behind that, why is that? Where are the planned coal-fired stations still coming? So if we look at what's planned out there in pre-construction, as they call it, there's about 280 gigawatts of coal still planned. And that's on a base of 2,100. So it's 10% of the existing coal field. That's a lot.
So this is sorry to interrupt you. So this is coal plants waiting to be financed. Does that mean an increase in funding?
Correct. Well, as I say, what it is coal plants either planned, pre-permitted or permitted, they're called. And essentially some of those are way before finding financing. A lot of them will get cancelled in our view because they just don't make sense. But some are seeking financing at the moment for sure, and there are different stages of that. But I think, again, within the financing, I mentioned those countries, it's important to realize that 70% of financing comes from government-based entities. And state banks are very significant, particularly in Asia and particularly in China. So while it's right to concentrate on potentially funding coming from the private sector and finance markets, you've got to remember a lot of this is coming from governments themselves, and they are cross-funding. Now, a very important announcement came from China at the COP, where they said they would get out of financing coal stations outside of China. That is considered significant and could knock 40 gigawatts off that 280 number. So we'll have to wait and see how it plays out, but that's a useful announcement.
One of the arguments we often hear is that investment in fossil fuels is still needed until countries make that transition to something a bit healthier. Is that true?
Well, look, I mean, I think it depends on your so-called scenario. So I don't get too technical, but so we're talking now, let's widen it beyond coal to oil and gas as well, or fossil fuels. And let's talk about the major sort of push in the world, which is to get to a 1.5 C outcome and that means net zero by 2050. That's the big focus, and people want to get there in quite a hurry. So they want to look at these scenarios, which essentially mean, if you want to do that, no new coal-fired stations at all from today, finish. Or that 280 has to disappear. And no, in fact, no oil and gas exploration. You need to sort of throttle that back immediately. Now, that is the 1.5 world. I work with a group that is commissioned by the UNPRI And we look at something called the inevitable policy response, and we look at forecasting what we think might happen as well as what would be required to get to 1.5. And we think we can forecast, say, something like 1.8, which is what the IEA thought the COP the outcome of the COP might have been, and we had forecast that before the COP. And in that, we need to start throttling back on coal. Certainly no new coal from 2025 onwards is a very small window, and we would be very careful how much you do. And then on oil and gas, there's a final window here as oil demand peaks, we think, in the next 2 or 3 years. And following that, it's going to rapidly run off. So there's not a lot of room, even on this not on the so stringent 1.5 outcomes. Even at 1.8, there's not that much room for new investment in oil and gas. There's some, but not a lot.
Very interesting to get your thoughts. Mark Fulton, Chair of the Research Council at the Carbon Tracker and founding partner of Energy Transition Advisors. Thank you for your time.